These 25 fantasy books are considered the best must-reads according to the fantasy subreddit Best Books to Read. Check the link in the description for the whole list because we're only going to see the top 25. And I want to present you a challenge for a total of 50 points. Let's see how many of these books have we read. We'll give each other 2 points if we read the series and 1 point if either we own the books or if we started the series. In position number 25, we have The Expanse by James S. A. Corey. 0 points for me here, but this is one of those series that I've really wanted to read for so long. It's a modern sci-fi that it blends perfectly adventure plus mystery plus politics, and in essence it's the story of this unlikely crew that go in the Rocinante and they together are trying to solve this mystery that has deep connections to the entire future of the universe. There's a war that it's about to be unfolded, there's a lot of politics. Number 24, we have Dark Tower by Stephen King. Also 0 points for me here. This is Western fantasy and I've heard that it's either a hit or a miss for a lot of people. You at least need to read book 1 and 2 in order to decide if you're gonna read it, because the first book it's fairly short and it's a lot of setting, so you can not properly understand the stakes that the story has. We will be following this last gunslinger and he will be chasing down this man. This is one of the favorite series of Johan from Library of a Viking, so it's certainly a story that I want to give a try. Number 23, we have the only standalone in this list, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. 2 points for me here. It is a story that it's fascinating. I reckon it's not for everyone in the sense that it has a very unique writing style, and it's a story that it will be the delight for a character-driven reader. But it's not a lot about the plot. It's not really adventurous. It really has a slower pace, but it allows you to understand this magical world in which Piranesi lives, because at its core, it's a story that will follow him in this massive house that is as big as the universe, the world, and he does not know why there's this different magic, why things happen like that. He is alone except for the companionship of the other, and together they're trying to figure out the magic of the house. It is at its core kind of like a mystery, a thriller as well. It has this plot twist, these twists and turns, and the magic of this book is that everything is told as if Piranesi were writing a diary, and he will write that almost as if he were a scientific. So everything it's very scientific oriented, such as entry for the first day of the 5th month in the year of the albatross came to the southwest halls. And I love this book because it's really thought-provoking. Number 22, The Witcher. I will give myself 1 point here because I own the first book, which I read, but I have not read the complete series, and it's not actually a story that it's been my favorite. But at its core, we will follow the adventures of Geralt and Ciri, and it's a story about war, about adventure, about destiny, about love, and there's this gloomy setting with monsters. For me, it wasn't my cup of tea. I found this story to be quite hard to get into it because I was not able to really connect with the character. It reads more like different short stories than a core lengthy story in which you can really dive deep. Number 21, we have The Locked Tomb. 1 point again for me here. I read the first one, Gideon the Ninth, and I own book 1 and book 2. This is more of a fantasy space opera, and it has a lot of very interesting elements. It's considered a very weird story, but it really has this blend of adventure, of mystery, of humor, of queer characters that really are different, that are misfits, but that are, you know, good in that sense. It's been pitched multiple times as one of the most weird stories that a lot of people have read, and I can agree that book 1 was a little bit of you having faith of what you're reading and trusting the process, because man, it is a little bit complex. But then the ending, the different tropes, and the idea of having these different necromancers in space, having these different houses, each of these houses are of necromancers, but each of them have a different power. It was really fascinating. Book 1 talks about this competition in which the different heirs of these houses need to do something, do some sort of tournament in order to get into the power of these different houses. It is fascinating, and I really recommend if you're willing to trust the process. Number 20, we have The Earthsea Chronicles by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's 1 point for me because I certainly own this. It's chunky, but I haven't read it yet. It's a story though that I believe it will be right down my alley. It's a compilation of different stories that are quite short and are leaning more towards the young adult spectrum, so it will read more adventurous, really having a lot of coming to age tropes, and I absolutely love those. It's supposed to be this classic fantasy, and overall I've heard it's a story that reads really fast. Number 19, The Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Another 1 point for me. I've read first book, but I don't own the rest. It's a very unique story, not only because the setting it's quite fresh, but also the POV in which the author writes the story was also quite new for me. And this is actually the point that did not work as much for me, but the story follows this adult character and she lives in this world where the earth, it's kind of like dying, things are happening, and she will need to start this quest because her child has been kidnapped. And along the journey we will get to see these flashbacks of understanding her past, her powers, and it's a story that it's deeply emotional. It has certainly this twist, and everything has a purpose in this story. Number 18, Motherboard's Diaries. I've only read book 1, so also 1 point for me, and it's a sci-fi story that really fascinated me because it has this perfect blend between adventure, humor. There are short stories which also make it really easy to get yourself in. I found this to be perfect, at least book 1, to cure a reading slump because it's just so short, it's so humorous, but at the same time stakes are so high that you're just committed to the story beginning to end. It's easy to get there, and we will be following Mardabot, and he talks about himself as being Mardabot, and it is quite relatable because he is socially awkward. He does not like to be surrounded by humans, by anyone, and it is very comical and also strangely relatable at the same time to see how he is playing a role. He sometimes really wants to be with these people, wants to help them, but at the same time he doesn't want to be in that inner circle. He is nervous about that, and I found it really refreshing. The narration in the audiobook, it's phenomenal if you want to give this one a try, and this is also considered one of the classics by a lot of people. Martha Wells did amazing work here. Number 17, we have Cradle by Will White. Also 1 point for me, just read the first book, Unsold, and this is a long series, the top of progressive magic, and that's precisely the point that I believe it's making this story as entertaining, as good, and it's something that you cannot miss because you start with this very Avatar-like kind of character, and it's a chosen one, and we'll see how this character will start learning his powers. He will get himself lost in this world where also potential war is unfolding, something terrible is happening, and he will need to step up. There's a lot of this chosen one trope of figuring your space, and I found that really endearing. And I haven't read yet how the story concluded, but I've heard that it's a very good ending and that, you know, it's a very satisfying story overall, and the perfect if you like elemental magic, if you like these characters that are all in magic steroids and that are almost invincible. In the other side, I've heard precisely this point that because this character is so powerful as time progresses, it becomes a little bit complex to follow or to maybe empathize with, but it's a story that all in all has a lot of fans, and fans love it. At number 16, we have Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Another 1 point for me, just read 1 of the whole series. It is a very quick, slightly humorous and adventurous story. Well, we have this blend of a mystery, a thriller, plus magic. It's kind of like Supernatural, the TV series, but with our main character, Harry Dresden, being this wizard, and he is the main one that takes care of everything dangerous that happens with the paranormal creatures in this urban fantasy. That it's the delight of a lot of readers. I've just read the first book and it wasn't necessarily the best one for me, although I've heard that you need to read until at least book 3 or 4 in order to properly get the gist of this story, so definitely will give this one another try. Number 15, a classic, Dune. And this is my sci-fi shame. I have not read Dune. I will give myself 1 point because I certainly hold a collection, but I have not read it. I've seen the movie, I've loved it. I know the story, I really like it. Please let me know down below if you read it and what are your thoughts about it. At this core, we'll follow the story of the Atreides family as they get into this unhospitable world and the different adventures that unfold follow. There's also this blend of politics, also of adventure, of knowing different creatures. Let me know, how are your points so far? Number 14, we have the Red Rising saga. 2 points for me here because I read the first trilogy and I own almost all books. It's a very dystopian story with a very empowering and passionate and emotional moments. I think the author has a unique power here, which is that you're able to feel deeply, and it just, you read and you get all the vibes, all the emotions, and I don't think that's a quite easy feat to do. We will follow the society that at its core is deeply broken, and everyone is divided in different layers, and these layers are characterized by different colors, and at the top we have the golden and at the bottom we have the red ones. Each of these colors also represents kind of like what are you gonna do in life and how much you can get, and we will follow the story of Darrow, who is one of the red ones. Something happens to him and he will try to infiltrate the system and breaking it down. You will get to see a lot of the strategy of war scenes, but it's also really an ode to friendship, to love, and I absolutely loved it. It's a story that makes you fear about the characters, about what is going to happen to them. It's not something that reads easy, and I've had that from book 4 onwards. It turns into more darker tone, so if you're also willing to a transition into that grim dark vibe, I've had this is phenomenal. So I'm just already there, about to do that jump. Number 13, we have the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. 1 point for me. I've read only first book. I know this is a favorite of a lot of people. It's the epitome of character driven, of having this unreliable narrator that it's at the same time very powerful and very charismatic. There's a lot of people that says this is similar to Empire of the Vampire, and Empire of the Vampire I absolutely loved, so maybe I need to give Name of the Wind another try and reread it, because when I read this it was not for me. At its core we'll follow the story of Kuboth, and he is telling us his life story, which will allow us to see different spectrums of his life, different moments, and it's going to be kind of like a dark academia of times, because we are gonna see him in this university kind of vibe, but also there's this adventure, this more medieval setting. Let me know down below if you believe I should give this one a reread in case I suddenly fell in love with it. I read it more than 10 years ago, I believe, so yes, I read it in 2009, so maybe, obviously, my reading taste has changed. Let me know. Number 12, and one of my greatest fantasy shames, we have Harry Potter, and for me it's going to be probably 0 points. I read book 1, but I don't own it, and I'm not sure if I even finalized book 1, and if I did it so long ago, so oh no, I know this is the classic wizard school story, and I absolutely adore the movies. In here we will be mainly following Harry and his friends as they defeat the greater evil. It's this fight between the good and the evil that will have a lot of adventure, a lot of different characters, a lot of grace in between, in a very beautiful blend between a soft and a hard magic system at times that makes this story the delights of a lot of fantasy readers. Number 11, The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch. 1 point. I read just the first one, The Lies of Locke Lamora. It's a story that definitely reads differently, not only because you have these different back and forths, but also because the story it's broken, and you see one part, the adventure is happening, and then you get back to the past in order to contextualize what is happening. So it's a tone, it's a prose that takes a little bit to read, to get used to it, but once that you get to a certain point, you get to see, you know, the stakes, how this is being created for an optimal emotional punch, and at the end it's a story about a heist. It has a lot of tropes that I love and that I know are perfect if you are a fantasy lover, because you will have this family found vibe, it's a heist, and it's this kind of world in which it's very unlikely that our characters win, so you really root for them because they see themselves fighting really high stakes. And it's one of the favorite series of Murphy Napier, which basically it's what led me to read this story to start with, and I believe I will continue with it. Position number 10, we have The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, and I feel this is good here. That Greenbone Saga belongs into a top 10 best books to read, modern fantasy classics that you cannot miss, because it is really a story that has so many good things. 2 points for me here. We'll have this urban fantasy with this Godfather touch to it. We will see a war between these 2 different clans in Kaiken. They fight for the control of the Yate, but if by hearing this you believe that you will have this very incredible ninja style kind of story, then no, you will have something that it's quite better, because there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of family drama, it's also very character driven, and these characters are fleshed out in a way that it's to die for. They are great characters, they are no good, and it's a story that will make you really reflect on your moral standards, because you will root for them. It's really fascinating, these different characters. You will mainly see the story of one of these clans and how they are organized, their dynamics, they are brothers, and it's just one of my favorites. Fondly, it's a genius. Number 9, and a story that I am hoping to get to read soon, we have Melassan, the Book of the Fallen. 0 points for me here, and I know this is something that it's like, but you're a booktuber and you have not read Melassan. I know, one of my biggest shames again. But in this case, it's a story that it's pitched as being fairly complex. It is very long, it spans throughout this massive land, and you will have a lot of different characters, so certainly it makes for a read that deserves a lot of focus, a lot of attention. You need to be in the mindset for something like it, and maybe, you know, read something lighter close to it, because otherwise you will feel like a lot. It's a story that leans towards the darker, grimdark side, and it's heavy, it's savage, but it's also considered one of the best series by a lot of people. I cannot wait to see where I fall within this group. Will I hate it? Will I love it? It's a very polarizing series, and at its core it's war and it's adventure. The author Steven Erikson wrote the first book as if it were prepared for a movie or a TV series, and you can certainly read it in the way in which you see a lot of stuff. So I'm really keen to see, pun intended, what I feel when I'm reading this. Number 8, Discworld by Terry Pratchett. I will give myself 1 point here because I read 2 books. Discworld is this massive world in which a lot of different, unique, fresh, humorous and adventurous stories happen. Terry Pratchett was the MVP, the GOAT. His writing style, it's so unique, it's so smart. You see adventure and you see a very plot-driven story, but it always allows you to understand the character. So I'd say it's a very good blend of character and plot-driven, and it's so smart. You read it and the humor, it's very British, but it is really done in a way in which you will laugh out loud while reading it, and I think that's very, very, very hard. I've just read Guard Cards and more. These books are almost standalones, and you have these characters that are always kind of like imperfect and really, really relatable because of that. If you're liking this so far, consider joining my Patreon, where we are currently having a Wheel of Time read along. We also have monthly reading challenges, and overall a very good fun. In position number 7, we have The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. This is a story that I will give myself 1 point, if even. I do own the whole Lifeship trilogy, and I read the first one, and this is basically the main world that Robin Hobb has created, where we have these different trilogies that connect one with each other, and they're all very character driven. This author, it's famous because she's basically able to craft stories that feel so realistic, so very relatable, but are like not a lot of plot happens, but a lot of things happen. Overall, it's supposed to make you feel, make you cry, and it's kind of like a depressing read if you want to see what happens, in the sense of you follow these characters, something happens to them, and because you feel so much for them, you feel them. I've been at odds with Robin Hobb because that blend of going so much toward the leaner side in the sense of the pacing, but I am giving it another chance with Lifeship trilogy, which feels a little bit more adventurous to me, and I really, really enjoyed the first book, so let me know if I should continue. I know this is also a classic of fantasy, and one that a lot of you, I'm sure, have read. Number 6, we have Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. 1 point for me here because I own books 1 to 6. I've read book 1. I'm currently starting book 2, and this is a story that it's one of the favorite for a lot of people and kind of like an essential fantasy book that you need to read. It has this chosen one at its core, and you will have this quest, this fight between the good and the evil. These characters that as they progress, they get more powerful, but also get more nuanced. It starts being this kind of familiar story in which we will be following these different teenagers that live in this village, but then the stakes are high for them and they are kind of like selected, and then they need to see what happens, and they will be evolving, maturing, and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of magical elements. There's supposed to be this massive amount of characters, this world that has high stakes, this great wars, and it's a story that I cannot wait to keep reading. I believe really strongly that these will become one of my favorite series of all time. Number 5, we have Mistborn by Brando Santo. Although I got into fantasy due to Elantris, and I absolutely loved it because of that, Mistborn is the story that definitely allowed me to see a magic system that made me say, wow. It has a hard magic system that even now feels one of the best ones that I read so far. It is so unique, so interesting. We'll have these different metals that people can ingest, and depending on the metal, you can have one power or another. The thing is that only the selected few are able to really ingest these metals and have these powers. And the setting, it's very gloomy. We will have the society that it's suppressed because this bad person, the Lord Ruler, it's ruling for hundreds of years, and an uprising is about to happen. Everything is kind of like disguised as a heist, but what happens, it really transcends to that. There's adventure, there's love, there's really charismatic characters with really, you know, these amazing fight scenes. It's a story that also touches base a little bit into religion. It's been a while since I read it, but I still remember how much I absolutely loved the feeling of finalizing Mistborn. Number 4, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Also 2 points here. Even if you've watched the TV series, I feel the books read way differently. Yes, you of course know some stuff, but the feeling of not wanting to keep reading because you know something terrible will happen to your characters and you cannot avoid that. I've never had that feeling as much as with this story. I remember just seeing something terrible happening and thinking, well, this for sure cannot be happening, and yeah, hell, it was happening. So it is so good. It is the story of these different houses that in essence what the power of the realm, and you will see these different alliances. It's very political, and it is wonderful because you follow a massive cast of characters, these different houses, and it's also a story in which you don't have the bad ones and the good ones. Everything and everyone, it's kind of like bad. They have their own motivations, and everyone is pretty grey, and you get to understand them. And that was a fascinating psychological experiment, and I really encourage you to read it and see where you land. Number 3, First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. 1 point for me. Just read the first book, and this is also a grim, dark story. It's also kind of like a classic, a must read. There's a lot of fans of Joe Abercrombie. He definitely has a power writing characters that are nuanced, that are grey, and that still has something really conniving about them, something that it really feels charismatic, although they certainly aren't. There's also this very unique humor to it, and it's a story that leans more towards the character side than to the adventurous plot side, but the pacing in itself, it's not super slow, so it makes for an entertaining read for you to understand this if you enjoy that character driven side. I've only read the first book, and I was feeling that not a lot of things were happening, and that was the reason why I was not really feeling it. But I know story gets better, and also there's the Age of Madness that it's also phenomenal. So what can I say? This is also one of my shames in fantasy, that I'm not head over heels about this story. Number 2, we have The Middle-earth Universe by Tolkien. also one of my shames. 1 point just for me here. I own the whole series, but I have not read it yet. It's a story that I really want to read because it's not only this classic fantasy that I believe everyone at some point should read because of what's embedded in the genre and, you know, in the collective mindset, but because it's an adventure, a quest at its core, and I love quests, the fight between the good and the evil, and, you know, characters are fascinating, they are really endearing, and I've also heard that the narration, if you go for the audiobook, it's phenomenal. The actor that did Gollum on Smeagol, it's the one narrating it, and it's supposed to be really chilling and perfect, either if you want to read it as you were reading, it's supposed to be phenomenal. I cannot wait for these. Position number 1, we have Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, and it's so well deserved. It's my favorite series of all time, and it's a story that I believe if you haven't read it yet, you really should. 2 points for me here. What makes the series so phenomenal, it's not only that it's big in scope, in that Sanderson has this very accessible writing style with these incredible endings called the Sanderlanches, but because it has such an incredible display of the human mind, we will see different characters really suffering through different scenes, and you know, all of them have a very unique way of facing reality, and I thought that the depiction of mental illnesses were really relatable, that were really well done, and it really made me feel all the feels. We also have this very political side to it. There's these different war scenes, this action, and it feels profound while it feels empowering. And the thing about Sanderson is that it just gives you this sense, you know, while you're reading, you feel more, you kind of transcend into a moment in which you can almost, you want to clap, you want to laugh, you want to cry, and it is so unique for me. It's what makes fantasy for me so good, because it's just a world that makes you get lost to it. It's the perfect moment also to get in here, because book 5 is going to be released this year, so just join the wave. It is a fascinating read, and I absolutely loved it beginning to end. All of these makes 27 out of 50 points for me. Let me know down below how many points did you score. I cannot wait to see that and to have wonderful discussions down below in the comments.